So with us tonight are Renee Price, James Williams, Sally Green, and it's my pleasure to introduce our liaison with this group, Carol Miller. Carol.
And I'll just note that we're lucky also to have another co-chair of the Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition, that's Hathaway Pendergrass.
And Sally.
Can you?
And I'm Sally Green, not Sally Green.
Sally Green.
Yeah.
Sally
Green's very good.
So I was noting to the guests at our table that on November 10th will be 125 years since the Wilmington coup, when those of us who are familiar with the story there was the first coup in the United States. A group representing then the Democrats stormed the town council, and a coalition of mixed race members of the society, and ended up killing an untold number of black residents in Wilmington. And a lot of people, I'm new to North Carolina, relatively new, but during this whole Black Lives Matter discussions, you know, our friend Alice Glover, who goes there, said, I never heard of that in my life. I never heard one word about the Wilmington coup. And here it is, 125 years, we still don't know how many people were murdered on that day. And there is a memorial there, and most people, when you go to Wilmington, don't even know it exists. So these things are important to talk about. As Marcus said, they're part of the history, that things that happened in our community and things that we need to be aware of. So I'm a member of the Humanitarian Crisis Working Group, and I see Katie and some of our other members are here. And this is an issue, racial justice, something that's very important to us. And so when the church asked who would be a liaison to the Remembrance Coalition, I volunteered. So I'm really happy to represent Binkley and to bring this issue to the forefront, because I was at a Wednesday dinner and somebody said, oh, well, I've never heard about the Orange County Remembrance Coalition. So it's an important thing to talk about, and something that we need to share to ensure that this is not what continues to happen in our communities. So tonight we're really fortunate to have Renee Price, who is a member of the House of Representatives of the North Carolina Assembly, representing House District 50, and a co-chair of the coalition. She's also a co-founder and project director of Free Spirit Freedom, which is a cultural arts initiative that operates under the Hillsborough Art Council. Your own 501c. Okay, well, you need to update your LinkedIn page. but it's a group that builds bridges of cross-cultural understanding through photographs and storytelling. And then we have the two other co-chairs here, Sally Freeman and Hathaway Pendergrass. And then also we have with us a founding member of OCCRC, and that is James Williams, who's been with us here before at several of the other events. He is a retired public defender of District 15B, Orange and Chatham counties, and founder and current chair of the North Carolina Commission on Racial and Ethnic Disparities, and a board member of the National Consortium on Racial and Ethnic Fairness in the Courts. So I'm going to invite James up first, and he's going to talk a little bit about the founding of the coalition, and then we're going to have Renee give a little presentation about some of the people who were impacted in the community and what's going to happen next and how you can get involved. And then we'll have time for Q&A. So I'm going to invite James to come on.
Good evening. And I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that you are here. I mean, the thing with two mics, I'm not sure, I guess I'll speak up. So, my name is James Williams, and I am one of the co-founders of OCCRC, and actually until last week, I was one of the co-chairs. So, OCCRC was founded, if my memory is correct, in October of 2018. So that's about 5 years that we've been in existence. My background is criminal defense, but even more broadly, my background is racial justice. So even before I became a lawyer, that was something that was of importance to me. And so when I realized that there was going to be the opening of this set of museums in Montgomery, the Peace and Justice and the National, we call it the lynching. It's not, that's not its proper title, but you know what I'm talking about. I knew that I wanted to be there. I had met Bryan Stevenson, in the course of my death penalty work, so I knew who he was. I had some sense of what he was trying to build, and I wanted to be there. And the other thing I think that's significant, at least from my standpoint, is that the grand opening was April 26th of 2018, and April 26th of 1951 was my birthday, my date of birth. And so it was like a message that I was supposed to be there. Now, prior to going, because other people had become aware that the museum, was about to open, and were aware, some of them, that there was a marker, a monument with the name of Manly Macaulay on the premises of the museum. And so there was interest even before I went to Montgomery. I had several people approach me and say, how are we going to get that monument to North Carolina? And so I knew that there was interest, but I also sensed, having, had interactions and having some sense of, not to say that Bryan Stevenson and I were good friends, but I knew how he did business. And I knew that he was not going to allow people to come to Montgomery with a pickup truck and get that duplicate monument and drive it back to wherever and put it up. I knew that there had to be a process, there had to be work put in to get to the point where that would happen. And so, after April, May, June, I sent some emails to some people. I think Renee had also been contacted by some people. And so I started thinking about what we could do and form a small group of folk who were interested and at least get the conversation started and see where we would go with it. And so that's kind of how OCCRC was formed. I mean, initially I was vice president of Chapel Hill Carrboro NAACP, so some of the entities that were originally invited to the table included Chapel Hill Carrboro NAACP, the Civil Rights Center at UNC, Ted Shaw, and folk like that, Center for the Study of the American South, entities that we knew would be interested in exploring this issue. And so that's kind of how we initially got started. It was a relatively small group of people, and we met. And we had an opening event there in Hillsborough at the what's the name of that? I know the senior center is there.
No, at the church, United Church of...
Well, yeah, that was the welcome, but I'm talking about the big event where we actually put on a program, was there in Hillsborough, and it was standing room only. And so that, I think, sort of indicated strongly to us that there was a lot of interest in this issue. Now, why? I think I've always been a student of history, and I think John Hope Franklin sort of says it better. I mean, there are a lot of people who talk about why history is important. I mean, James Baldwin, you name it, a number of people. But John Hope Franklin said, and this resonates with me, if this house is to be set in order, we must begin not with the present, but with the past. And that is what this work is all about. Looking back at what transpired, racial terror, racial inequities, violent suppression of the right to vote, all of that, there's a historical legacy. And that legacy helps explain so many of the inequities that we see today. And so if we're going to get people to be more committed to trying to get traction on these issues is difficult. And I think if people understand the history involved, it helps pave the way to the understanding of why it really needs to be done. And so we set out doing the work. We did, when I look back on our legacy of 5 years, some of the most incredible programming that I've been involved in for the past 5 years has been with programming at OCCRC. But one of the things that was really important to me is building the organization. In other words, looking at who we had at the table and making decisions about who else we needed at the table. And so one of the things that I did a year and a half ago was to launch an effort to try to get more faith communities involved in the work and more familiar with what OCCRC was and what we were doing. And over the course of the year and a half, some of the that has paid off, because if you think back to the journey of reconciliation and the work that was done, the series of programs that were done around that, several of the churches were involved in that effort. This year we look at a letter from Birmingham jail. We look at 4 little girls. Of course, I don't know, I think we did programs, both of those here at Binkley, and Binkley and other churches have begun to come on board in this work. Also looking at generational issues, trying to get more young people involved and working with people like Lori Clark and the Chapel Hill Carborough youth group, and trying to bring them to the table to not just be present at events, but to take ownership, to help plan, to make them a key part of the work. And also looking at what other entities that were, we had a number of people, I would call them elites. I call myself an elite. I wanted to see more ordinary people at the table, people whose lives were most directly impacted by the inequities in our society. So reaching out to organizations like Northside, the Jackson Center, the organization that Reverend Campbell, I'm drawing a blank on the name, but those entities that day in and day out interact with, as what some call the lesser of these. I wanted to make sure they were at the table, so we brought them on board, and so that's kind of where we are now. I feel good about where we are, trying to stabilize funding, setting up a process where we could apply for grants, where we could seek funding, making sure, trying to enhance our communication efforts. That's something that's still underway, something that was really, and still is, even though I'm no longer a co-chair of OCCRC. I think that when you say that there are people who don't know, I mean, I think there's a message there, and that is that we could do a better job with our communication strategy. We need to develop one. We need to get people at the table that can do that. So I'll just leave it there. There's a lot more I can say, but I know I'm not the only voice that you're going to hear from this evening. And I know one of the things that I'm happy to talk about is the work that can be done and what that's being done involving other coalitions like the one we have here in Orange County. Thank you.
We've already acknowledged the other co-chairs, Sally and Hathaway, and I thank them for helping me with the PowerPoint and for everything that they do. And you can't hear me? Right. I wasn't speaking into the mic. I always had that problem. So I was saying that I wanted to thank co-chairs, former co-chair, and everyone actually here that, for your interest in this topic. I also want to make mention of Katie Murray, who was with the Orange County Arts Commission, and she had mentioned this memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, before it started, because she had been to one of her national arts conventions or summits and had come back to Orange County and had told me about it, and she was really excited about bringing, as James mentioned, bringing this monument back. Of course, I knew that you just don't bring back a monument about lynching and put it in the middle of Orange County. But the reason I bring up her name is to show that even the arts, when we talk about arts and culture, and oftentimes that's the least priority when people are looking at a budget, but to show how important the arts are in communicating our history and connecting the past to the present and to the future. So I just wanted to make mention of that. So, and I am not going to read the PowerPoint to you. You can see it here, and I'll just make mention of some of the items on here. So I think it's important, and when we talk about the mission and the vision of this organization, is that we're trying to correct the narrative and also to control the narrative about our shared history as Americans. And as you've alluded to, many people do not know our history as African Americans, or even your history. I mean, my history is part of yours and vice versa. So I think it's important that we do this, and through the various programs that we have had, and even with this coalition. And one of the things that I like to say is that, and it's the third bullet here, the work of the coalition is to disrupt and overcome the detrimental systems and mindsets that have plagued America for generations, and to help usher forth a future of humanity, equity, and justice for all of us. And I think that we do that through a lot of the programming that we have done, through education, bringing together our skills and resources, and through education. Now, James mentioned some of the organizations that are part of our coalition, and here you can see, kind of a word map or a logo map of some of the organizations we have. The county and all the towns are involved in this, as well as several organizations, a number of organizations, and you can see Binkley is up there. There's kind of hard to see, but Binkley Church, Binkley Chapel Church is there. Next slide. So when we talk about the Equal Justice Initiative, these are, two of the pictures here we got these from the website. This shows what those monuments look like for those of you who have not been there, and I personally have not been there. I spent 2 years in Alabama, and I just have not bothered to go back yet. And, it was one of the I gotta say, it was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had. But it was very intense, and we did a lot of work working with black farmers and whatnot, and it was quite eye-opening. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
but I just haven't gone back yet. And the picture to the far, I'm really bad at this, to the far right, is a picture of the, I guess, column or monument for Manly Macaulay, and I think, James, that's from your visit to Montgomery. And James has already told you about how we got started. We had to fulfill one requirement, which was to have at least 5 organizations or individuals that were interested in the work. And we pulled that together and formed our coalition and continued to grow. So what EJI had done was to identify at least, and we know this is an underestimate, 6,000 lynchings that had occurred between 1865 and 1950. And these are the ones that, through their definition, were lynched, what they call racial terror lynching. Now, other lynchings took place, and we actually, it was because of some of the work that we did, the research that we did, that we expanded this. When they started initially, they had a different time frame and a different definition, and we've expanded it, plus they've done more research. So we know that there have been over 6,000 racial terror lynchings, and of that number, over 120 occurred in North Carolina, and at least 5 in Orange County. Now, when EJI first started, they only had the one Manly Macaulay, but we've done further research, and they've accepted our research, and we know that there were at least 5. And so now I'll go forward and mention some of the people that we are recognizing. Okay, great. First, again, is Manly Macaulay. My iPad is not Manly Macaulay, and he was lynched October 30th, 1898. And as Carol mentioned, I call it massacre, the Wilmington massacre that occurred just a few days later. And there was a sentiment that was going throughout the South as white communities, and I'm sure it happened in the North as well. The North is not immune to racism by any stretch of the imagination. But the sentiment that black people were getting too much of the economic wealth and too much political power. And particularly black men were a target, or anyone who was trying to advance themselves were a target for lynching, and Manly Macaulay was one that suffered. Mike Ogle, who's a freelance journalist, he did a lot of research on Manly Macaulay. We actually went to the home of the great nephew of one of the men that was part of the posse. He had reached out to, Gordon had reached out to Mike, but I had already known Gordon. And so we went over to his home, and then he took us on a tour of the Brewer Farm, which was the name of the Brewers were the people that were accusing Manly Macaulay running off with the farmer's wife. They said eloping, but then again, how do we define eloping? How did they define it 100 years ago? Anyway, he was lynched, only 18 years old. His body, when they brought him back to Orange County, his body hung there for 10 days. And no one could take it down at the risk of being punished or killed themselves. And it's near the present day, and where he was, we figured out where he was lynched, and somewhere near present day intersection of Old Greensboro Road and Hatch Road in Carrboro. Next slide. The next one, so now we're going to go back. So that was the first one, which had the date of 1898. But then we discovered that there were a series of lynchings right around Reconstruction time in 1869. And one was Wright Woods Malone. Now we thought his name was Wright Woods, but Glenn Hinson had done a lot of research and discovered that actually Woods was the name of the plantation owners, during the Civil War, and then when, after emancipation, he took the name of Malone. So this is the name that we're using now, Wright Woods Malone. And he was hung from a tree on September 12th. Until September 12th, and signaled by buzzards flying around. And there was a note that was attached to his foot that said, if the law will not protect virtue, the rope will. And the virtue they're referring to is the virtue of white women. And he was lynched near a little river up in the northeastern part of the county. Next slide. Now we come to the Morrow family. And Washington Morrow was killed in August. He and his brother had been charged with barn burning and had been taken to the jail in Hillsborough, and then they were taken to a field for further questioning. You know, the mob came, which is part of the kind of the formula of the lynching. You know, the mob came, took them out of jail, and they decided to let them go. But I think if anyone remembers some of the movies, I know sometimes we think Hollywood is glorified, but this is in fact what happened. As they said, you know, you can go now. Well, as they went, you know, leaving, they shot at them. And Washington suffered a bullet wound and died the next day from that wound. A couple months later, the father and brother were found about a half mile from their farmhouse, each hanging from a tree about 25 feet apart. And Lucinda, mother and wife, she found them, and pinned to her husband's chest was a note that said, all barn burners, all women offenders, we Ku Klux hang by the neck till they are dead, dead, dead. So again, you know, some of the things that we have to reckon with. And finally, I'll talk about Cyrus Guy. He died December 2nd, again, 1869. And he was both African American and Occaneechi Saponi. And what's interesting about this one for me is that people in Hillsborough knew about this lynching. But, and I think this is, the reason I want to bring this up is that the trauma that still exists, and even though this was, you know, 150 years later, you know, family members still live here and they still remember. And I knew about this lynching out on High Rock Road. And when we mentioned that, you know, that we were doing a soil collection for Cyrus Guy, even the people in the tribe knew of him. But people just didn't want to talk about it. And I think it requires a level of trust. And there were other lynchings, even as late as in the 1960s. A woman was telling me that she was told, she lived in Hillsborough, West Hillsborough, and she was told not, she was about 5 years old, and her father told her not to go near downtown Hillsborough because there was going to be a lynching. Anyway, Cyrus Guy, the site of his lynching is High Rock Road, which is in the upland area of Orange County. Next slide. And then there are all the unnamed. There's so many that we don't know their names. And I use this image here of the 45. I know we remember 45s. The young people wouldn't know what I'm talking about. Strange Fruit, which was made famous by Billie Holiday.
They were much better.
And we did a film screening at the varsity about Strange Fruit, and the person that actually wrote it was Abel Mirapole, who was the son of Holocaust survivors. And so, I mean, he had his own experience with Billie Holiday, but there's so many that are unnamed, just like, you know, strange fruit hanging from a tree. Next slide. And James indicated some of the events and activities that we have done, the education and the advocacy. One of the, I want to mention the inaugural reception, which we did have at the church on MLK, United Church of Christ. And we thought it was just going to be a few people coming in. We set up chairs for a few people. And then we had to set up more chairs. And we had to go and find more chairs. And so it was very, it was a very heartfelt reception that so many people were actually interested. Freddie Parker, Dr. Freddie Parker, who was chair of the history department at Central for many years, he says he's retired, but he's still teaching class. Anyway, he had put together a program one year about blacks in World War I, the Red Summer of 1919, and the Paris Pan-African Congress, to show that lynching was not just, isolated or even, collective incidents. It really seeped into other parts of our fabric, politically, socially, economically, and even the way that African Americans were treated, even as they tried to make progress. We had, I don't know how many days for the Ida B. Wells Symposium. Was it almost a month? Yeah, a month of activities regarding that with journalists from UNC and around the state, actually. We also had again, arts performances with Tarish, I guess he still goes by Ghetto Pippins. He did a performance, and then Dr. Sonny Kelly from UNC, he created a program where he brought together all of these lynchings and how you talk about this in the present, how you bring the past to the present, and then, of course, he has young children, and how do you tell this to your children as to, what happened. And then a series of community book reads that, and I've had to tip my hat to James for doing these, because I'm terrible. I don't read too many books, but I have so many other things to read. But there have been a number of community book reads that have brought the community together. So some of the events that we're still working on, these are sort of like the requirements of EJI. We've done 2 soil collections, one for Madeline McCauley, and that was pre-COVID. And then we did another one just recently where we honored the victims from 1869. And so that's the lower picture there, and it says Wright Woods, but again, we're correcting that. We're working on the marker installations. We were about to have a program in September, but we had some conflict and then waiting for EJI to respond. But we do have the marker, and we're planning something hope to plan something for early spring. And then that will be in Carrboro, in front of Carrboro Town Hall. We also have gotten approval for another marker on Orange County property in Hillsborough at the old courthouse. So that's been set up, and what's really beautiful is that the towns and the county have agreed to take care of the costs for installation. EJI, they cover the cost for the actual marker and the pole, and then it's up to each community to install it. And we've gotten approval from the county and the towns that they will take care of that. We're working on an essay contest for high school students where they write to a particular prompt, and the winners will get a cash donation, which they can use towards their education. And then there is the duplicate monument. And hopefully, I'll be honest with you, I'm unsure what the qualifications are for bringing that to, getting that here, and how we would actually, where we would put it and how we would, protect it, but that is something that we still need to work on. So the last slide. And this is how you can contact us. There are some slips of paper, I know, on your tables, but you can contact us by email. Donations can be made through the Human Kindness Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. They've been kind enough to be our fiscal sponsor because we are a coalition. We are not a separate 501c3. Checks would be made payable to HKF for OCCRC. And then we, for those that like to still use mail, we have a P.O. box that you can send inquiries, donations, whatever to us, or even if you have further information that we can use. We have QR codes that have been created for joining. The top one is for joining our mailing list, and the second one, the bottom one, is for donations. So with that, I just say thank you, and I guess we will open it up for questions. Is that how you want to do it? Bring it back up here?
I don't know if Sally or Hathaway want to say anything or add anything.
Hi. I had the honor of being part of the group that delivered the jars of soil to Montgomery in August. And I not only had that honor, I had the honor of meeting with Bryan Stevenson when we delivered the jars of soil. And, it was life-changing. It was a life-changing experience. And he said, I've been asked why Montgomery? why build this national, monument in Montgomery? And he said, you can build a Holocaust museum anywhere, but going to Auschwitz is a whole different experience. And that's really, what his sense of Montgomery is. So I just highly recommend making the trip down there if you haven't.
I don't know if you want to stay up there too. We're going to take questions, and our guest speakers will be happy to entertain any questions that you all have.
Could I say something about something that's coming up that we're doing, OCCRC? One of the things Renee mentioned, book reads. One of the book reads that we are engaged in right now is Margaret Barnum's book, award-winning book, By Hands Now Known. This book is about violence and racial terror in the United States, primarily in the South, within a particular time frame up through, I believe, the early 1900s up through the 1960s, I believe. But these are instances of violence that don't qualify as, quote, lynchings. And so they didn't necessarily get the attention of the racial terror lynching, but there were thousands of them. She's a law professor at Northeastern's Law School. She formed this group that has completed this database that has allowed the public to know about these thousands of cases. And one of them that she writes about took place right in Durham, North Carolina, Booker T. Spicerly. And so the Orange County NAACP, Justice United, Flyleaf Books, and Carolina Public Humanities have joined with OCCRC to do this book read. There have been some guided discussions. There's been one. There will be another on Sunday, I believe at 3 o'clock at the Orange County Public Library. Orange County Commissioner Sally Green will facilitate that discussion. And on December 2nd, the author, Margaret Barnum, will be at Flyleaf Books to discuss the book and to autograph the book. So I encourage you, I think she's going to be there at 3 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're able to attend, give it some thought. You might want to think about registering because there's limited space available.
It's on our website.
Oh, yes, it's on our website too, yes.
Good evening, everyone. I'll do that. Okay, I'm Hathaway Pendergrass. I just wanted to say, just reframe how this organization got here. Years ago, I went, just after James had gone, in 2018, I went with about 15 middle schoolers and my wife down to Montgomery, went to the museum, and I saw the marker, and I came back, and I spoke with Mayor Lydia Lavelle, who used to teach at Central, does teach, is a friend of mine, and I said, gosh, that'd be great if we could bring this back. And she said, oh, James has already been working on that. And I'm a part of this coalition, this organization, because of the invitation that James made to me and the work that James and Renee had put forth. And so anytime I can publicly just thank both of them for the work that they've done to bring us here and all of this. Any opportunity I can do that, I just want to do that. And I feel so honored to even be a part of this organization and a part of this. So thank you.
We have questions about what's going on in Montgomery, the Equal Justice Initiative, what's happening here in Orange County. I don't know if you all want to say something about that. There are other counties in North Carolina with coalitions doing the same work. And I think we were talking about the more active ones are Asheville, Chatham County, Guilford County, Wake,
Yeah.
Also,
New Hanover,
Warren County also.
and Warren.
I do want to mention something related to that. I've been to events of either marker installation, soils events, or essay contest events. Of all of those organizations that were mentioned, and in terms of organization, I think if you're looking at a gold standard, I want to say OCCRC, but I think Buncombe and Asheville is kind of a step ahead. I mean, in terms of resources and their communication effort. They have a mailing, what do you call that booklet, that newsletter that they do that is phenomenal. And I hope we can get to that point one day. So certainly those organizations are very much involved in this work. But I also wanted to mention them because one of the things that I've been giving thought to over the past 2 or 3 months is our coming together, these various coalitions coming together to plan a conference on lynching in the state of North Carolina for next year. And I've communicated with leadership from all of those coalitions. The only one I've not gotten a response from yet is New Hanover, and that may be because I reached out to the wrong person. But there is a lot of interest in moving this project forward. There's certainly interest locally, and not just within OCCRC, but other entities that are doing similar work. I want to see that happen. So I'm excited about that possibility. I mean, we certainly are probably decades away from where Maryland is in terms of a state. They have a state entity, entity like OCCRC. I mean, our legislature would never do anything like that, but I think we as coalitions and we as citizens and individuals, we can come close to that. So I did want to mention that.
I'll just add to that we have been sort of, in some sense, leaders in this, and some organizations gone a little further because we've been contacted. I know I had a meeting with the folks in Guilford County, and they were wondering how we did it, and had calls from New Hanover County. And just like with any organization where you've got volunteers, it takes a while. And so, I hear something, and they say, oh, we're going to do this, and then it'll be like months later, and they say, oh, well, how do we do this? And just kept going. But I think just having that model, and I've sent our agenda, our program, how we did our soil collection to them, and they used it, and word of mouth sometimes works very, very well. And I think the interest just continues to spread, and I hope it does. I think, and for me, what's important, perhaps even, I hate to say more important because I hate to put anything above anything else, but somehow we need to reach younger generation, those of us that don't have gray hairs coming in, so that they understand, because so much of the mindset that created these situations of lynching back then are still present, they're still current. And I see it in the, you mentioned legislature. I see it in the legislature. I see it in some of the laws that they are creating, that they're writing, and they try to hide it, but you can't hide some of this stuff. When they're taking, all of the stuff that we're talking about, they want to take it completely out of the schools. They want nothing mentioned about Black history other than in order to get your associate's or bachelor's degree, you have to take a civics course, and they have 6 requirements, And one of them is the reading of, well, it's like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and then they threw in there for good measure Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail. And so, we've got to be able to continue to tell the truth, put it in context, and make it so that people understand what is still affecting us. It's like a cancer. It continues to spread. I will say the one good thing that was able to be completed was the Freedom Park in Raleigh, which is right across the street from the legislature, and you really need to go visit that. Some of the words on the walls there it's just very heartwarming, and it's heartwarming, and then it's also sometimes kind of tragic because you realize, from whence it's coming, but it also is inspirational, I think. I do know that there's another African American monument that's been put on hold, who knows for how long, until we can vote certain people out of office.
Yes. That's it.
Questions?
Any other questions? So I do want to say, and you talked about history. Wilmington is already banned. The school has already voted to ban stamped by Kendi. So it's happening here in North Carolina. I just wanted to say, when we talk about the soil ceremony, like everybody knows what it is, but it is such a moving thing. And I don't know if somebody here would like to describe what it is and what it meant to you to be a part of it. And you're a storyteller. Please tell and seeing the soils in Montgomery.
Yeah. So I'll start out. So when we did the first one, Man Macaulay, the first thing that we tried to do was to find what EJI wants you to do is to collect soil, and they provide these huge mason jars like that big, 2 of them, one for them, which they put on a shelf in there, put on exhibit down there in Montgomery, the other one we keep here, and we've got them at between the 2 libraries here in Orange County, Chapel Hill. So we tried to go to the site where we thought Man Macaulay had been lynched. I tried to contact the owners of the property, no result. But lo and behold, Dave and Pat Mason lived nearby. And so we were able to use their property, it was close enough. And we went there and had the soil collection ceremony. And we had asked a couple to have drums and to lead the ceremony. It was very spiritual. And we collected soil and put it in a jar, and then we also collected extra soil. And then this was something that was suggested and highly recommended by EJI, which was to collect the soil and bring it back to where we were having, more of our program, because we can only have so many people at that site, because we're on a residential road, in a residential neighborhood. And so the Masons had asked that we keep it sort of low key. And so we brought that all back, and then after we had our program, we had speakers and dance, young people did interpretive dance and some poetry. And we also had a libation ceremony as well. Then we put, we had a table set up where we had a tub with some of the extra dirt and a couple of spoons, and people could come by and each put a spoonful of dirt into the jar. So it was a way of everyone participating in the soil collection. There was at least one person that just stood and watched and said no, he could not do it. So it affects everyone else a little differently. And so we put it in the jar. We had done all the blessings and everything else, and it was a very, very moving experience. And then we put it in. Now for that one, they had provided a container and all, and we sent it back to Montgomery. Unlike with the second one, where we had folks to take it down to Montgomery.
And there are beautiful photographs on our website.
Yes,
of the soil ceremony and of collecting the soil.
Yeah, we had
and the cleaning of the soil. It's kind of considered sacred since we don't have any artifacts from the lynchings. We go to the site, and that becomes
Yeah, nearby. But what was really interesting about the Matt Macaulay one is when Malika was, blessing, doing her blessing and all with, during the ceremony, and she said something about life coming from the soil because, we were talking about someone that had been murdered, and she talked about life coming from the soil, and I looked down and all of a sudden this little there's, I don't know, like a millipede or something started crawling out of the soil. I mean, it was really beautiful though. I mean, just as she said it, life and the Spirit just coming out of this at that time. And, but it was a very beautiful ceremony, especially, having the drums and someone that was speaking.
So the last soils collection ceremony that we did several months ago was similar in sort of format, but it had more certain challenges because there were 5 victims, and so the committee had to go about the work of trying to determine where those lynchings took place to the best of our ability, and then trying to get permission to collect soils from those sites. And it was a fairly a cumbersome and complicated process. And part of it is because the records related to those lynchings are pretty sparse and quite often vague on details. And fortunately, we had the assistance of Mark Chilton at the Register of Deeds of Orange County, who helped us tremendously. We had Glenn Henson, who's a member of OCCRC and also a professor at UNC, was a member of the Soils Collection Committee. And so between the two of them and some research that I was able to do, we were able to come up with what we thought were the best suitable locations. And then we went out and collected soils from those various sites. One of the things that I remember best about that is once we collected the soils and brought it back to the north side, what's the name of the community center? Hargraves Community Center. We had students from the local high schools that helped with the cleaning process, or they were involved in that process. And connecting with descendants of the ones that we could discern. Two of the families, we were able to determine descendants, especially on the Marvels. We were able to locate a church cemetery where a number of family members were buried that were Marvel victims, descendants of the Marvel victims, and we collected soil from the cemetery for that site. The other thing is, we got the Orange County Board of County Commissioners to do a resolution of apology for those lynching victims, I've got a copy of one of those that they mounted. I was able to meet with the family of some members of the family of the Morrow descendants. I know it was a mother, a grandmother, and a granddaughter. So you had 3 generations. And I met with them in Hillsborough and delivered this plaque to them, and they were so appreciative, and we had a chance to talk more about family history and family lore. So yes, the ceremony itself at the courthouse was a beautiful ceremony. We had some dancing, we had poetry. I think Jack Sheldon Ring did poem. I think the poet laureate of Chapel Hill.
North Carolina.
No, I'm talking. Then we have the other.
Both of them.
Yeah, we had two poets. So North Carolina's poet laureate and Chapel Hill's poet laureate did poetry. We had dance, and we had a nice reception. So it was a beautiful ceremony. And the soil is so rich in symbolism. And on our program, we had a quote from Bryan Stevenson that I think captures it beautifully. I'm not going to try to, because I would mess it up, but read it, because it talks about, in the soil there's blood, there's suffering, there's pain, but there's also in the soil new birth and growth and new opportunities, or something along those lines. So I think that was beautiful.
And just to add, even when we did the first one, we put the program and everything on Facebook. We tried to get in touch with people. We didn't know, because it was an extended family. Amanda McCauley was only 18, and some of his family members left the area, but others. And we looked at last names, and lo and behold, we're sitting at the table, and two of the members on the committee says, "Oh, we're related." And then we put the announcement out on Facebook, and people came as far as Maryland and Greensboro to participate. And I think, another beautiful part of that ceremony was when, and I wasn't trying to out him, but he was very appreciative, was that Gordon was sitting in with those extended family members, and they were able actually to connect, a descendants of the lynched and a descendant of, one of the men that had done the lynching.
Yeah, question?
Oh, one more question?
Hi, I'm Bob Pearson. I'm from Chatham County.
Yes.
And active in CRC in Chatham County. And I just wanted to congratulate you for really the fantastic work. And we've been in conversation since, I guess, about 2018 ourselves on this. We put up our historical marker last year. The question I had is more a suggestion and a question. We have the jars of soil on permanent display in the county library. And that perhaps you have some thought like that as well, but in a public place where the general public, children, adults, everyone can come and see them. Our last victim was a young boy of 16, 8 days past his 16th birthday. And so these are the stories that actually grip people, and these are the tales that they can take back with them. So I leave that with you, but I just think that what you are doing is fantastic, and I'm delighted to be here tonight. So thank you.
Well, we do have plans to put them on display. They're in our libraries now. One is in the Orange County Library, and the others are down in the Chapel Hill Library. They probably need to be switched because Marilyn McCauley is up in Hillsborough, but he was from Scarborough, and the other ones were from Northern Orange. But we do have someone, a woodworker, that is working on a case so that we can have them on display.
Right. So in addition to that, the case, and that case should actually be available sometime in December. But we're also hoping, if we can get the funds, to do I call it a pop-up art, a portable display where we can have banners curated that tell the history of these lynchings that could be used in combination with the soils display in the cabinet. And it could rest, say, for 6 months at the Chapel Hill Public Library. It could go to the Stone Center over at UNC. It could go to the Orange County Public Library and other places. So the thought is the same as yours, is making this information available to the public at large and not just sit somewhere gathering dust. That's something that's been very present on my mind.
And just one more thing to kind of, I see we have one more.
I think there are a couple more questions.
Okay. In terms of the response and the responsibility of government, and we did. I know you did a resolution for the soil collection, but prior to that, Orange County, while I was still on the board, with the help of Anna Richards, we drafted a resolution of apology from the from the point of the government. It was kind of hard to write it because, you know, it was like we were writing it, you know, it's almost, if you didn't want to write it, it was an apology to ourselves. But, you know, Orange County did, you know, the entire community has to take responsibility and realize that responsibility in order to make amends, because if you're unable to admit to the truth, how can you move forward? So we did do that, and even in doing that prompted more stories and more people talking, because finally, I should say Commissioner Richards, she told the story of her, I think it was uncle, who disappeared because her mother was raised in Mississippi, and she told us about how they always left the back door unlocked just in case he would ever want to come back in. But he had to escape because he knew that the plan was after him. And they don't know whether he was ever lynched and never found, or whether he just disappeared and, you know, changed his name and lived somewhere else. He just disappeared. Yes, there was a question over here. I'm not sure if you're trying to. Some people want to go. I think there was a question over here.
Anything else?
I think there was a question over here. No? Okay.
Well, I just want to thank our speakers today. I will say that Marcus and I have had a conversation about how we would like to get a group and go to Montgomery and bring we sponsor the NAACP youth here with Lori Clark. They meet here, and how great would that be if they wrote an essay and the essay got a free trip to Montgomery or something like that. But we would love to look into that, and we'll continue that conversation. If people say, hey, I'd love to go with you guys on a bus trip to Montgomery, you know, let us know, because we're going to start planning that. It is the most moving thing that you will ever experience. I mean, of course.
But do not go in July or August.
But
I said, don't go in July or August. It is hot.
Let's give a round of applause. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you again for the